Hey, everybody. Welcome back to University of Adversity. We have a great show for you today. We have Humble, the poet, joining us today. He is an author, hip-hop artist, designer, filmmaker, and creative consultant. And he's got a brand new book out called How to Be Loved, The Simple Truths for Going Easier on Yourself, Embracing Imperfection, and Loving Your Way to a Better Life. This book is amazing. I listened to it on audio while I was in Sedona, while I was riding my bikes, having coffee in the sun. It was amazing. And it was such a good reminder because a lot of the stuff he talks about is stuff we talk about on the show. So it was great to hear his perspective on so many different things. And we cover those in this episode. We go deep. We talk about a few different areas. We unpack his book. We talk about life. We talk about some of his past journeys, and it's a great episode. I loved it. Make sure you follow him on social media. He's got great content and very smart, entertaining dude. If you're new to the show or you're a regular listener and you're not subscribed yet, make sure you do so wherever you're listening to this. And if you feel called to do so, it's appreciated if you leave a 5-star review, a written review on Apple, or a 5-star review on Spotify, or wherever you could leave a review. Here we go. Humble the poet. Welcome to University of Adversity, my man. Good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So I really love your work. I've discovered you a few years back through Aubrey Marcus, and I was part of his mastermind for a couple of years. And I really have been sort of watching your growth and, the content you put out. It's really important. And it's really important. I feel like it's what we really need in our lives right now. And your concept of your new book and everything about it is how to be loved or how to be loved and then be loved. Yeah. So I love that. And it's just so important because I feel like people don't even know what that means. And before we get into talking about the book itself, I wanted to talk to you about the process first of writing your book, and maybe like what was your biggest takeaway or one of your biggest lessons that you found at the end of that, because it's a fucking process and putting it together and then being out there, it's almost like a journey of its own. Yeah. So speak to us about that first, man.
So you mean like straight, just logistics, being an author, writing a book, not specifically about this topic.
Just in general. Yeah. Or even like what this book did for you. Like what was that growth lesson that you kind of walked away with?
Yeah, completely. I think, the first book I ever published I published independently, and, I put it together myself. I designed it myself. I built it myself. Had a friend proofread it, not understanding there's levels to editing, and, put it out into the world on Amazon independently. And, it took 5 years for people to start noticing, 4 years for people to start noticing. And then, a few years later, I got picked up by the majors, and it went through the major system and, got available at all the bookstores and all of that. And in that journey, it was lightly edited, very lightly edited. But the versions of it that are still out now still have spelling mistakes in it. And but it did really well. So the first thing I learned is it's not a big deal. It doesn't got to be perfect. That was what I learned from that first book. Then, they republished that first book, and then they signed me for a second book. And then now this was, professional editors at HarperCollins, one of the biggest publishers in the world, saying, okay, you're a raw talent. You got great. You write really well. We're going to take you to professional level. And that was, I don't want to say a master class, because what it felt like was being back in grade 10 English and having an editor who was really focusing on, look, let's plan your ideas before you put them out. So no more free writing, no more just vomiting it out. Let's create a structure. What are you trying to say? How are you trying to say it? How will you support those ideas? And they held my hand through the process. And it was, the outline for my second book was 30 pages, and that in itself was a daunting task in the document. But because there was structure and they were holding my hand, it got done, and it made writing the book a much smoother task. But because of my first time with a publisher, I kind of I gave them the reins. I kind of said, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. You guys clearly know what you're doing. Just tell me what to do. And we created a book that I'm extremely proud of, but it was the way they envisioned it. They envisioned the book a certain way, and we did that book that way. For the third book, what I did was I took what I knew and I took what they knew and I put it together and did it my way. So I use formats and language and styles and energies that are authentic to me, but I use their form of planning, organizing, and structuring because it works. You know, our English teachers weren't lying when they said, you know, plan your hamburger method with your buns and your meats and your toppings when you plan out your essay and your thesis and all of that. I use that, and this time I wasn't with a publisher originally. I started writing without a publisher, so I was going to do it in reverse: finish the book, then go out and shop for a deal. So using their methods of organization and structuring and planning, I wrote myself maybe a 50-page outline. And then I went on the task of writing the book. So what ended up working well for me was that's when the pandemic hit. So it gave me purpose, it gave me direction, and I had a 30-page, 40-page document telling me what to do every day that I had created. So like, oh, what are we going to write about today? Oh, right. According to this page, this is what we're going to write about today. So I developed a really cool system where, you know, I took an idea, let's say, you know, the book has a chapter, Don't Fall in Love with Potential. So the night before, I would have these giant sticky notes. Here's an example of a smaller sticky note, but I had one's bigger than this.
Okay.
And I had these giant sticky notes, and then I would write, okay, don't fall in love with potential. I'd look at the outline, and then I would start, you know, doing additional research and creating just key points. And then I would just have an entire chapter written in just bullet points. Stick that up in front of my computer and then go to bed. And then as soon as my alarm hit in the morning, wake up before I did anything, went straight to the computer and boom, 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 let it all out. And vomit it out based off my feelings, but also there wasn't going to be writer's block because there were points. You know, if you're going to fall in love with potential, let it be your own. To fall in love with potential means you're not loving what's in front of you, denying a person who they are. The only person that can change, that could unlock a person's potential is themselves. So I had all these points, and then, you know, have little notes there being like, include a personal story, you know, include a little bit of comedy and do all of this. So that kind of became my pandemic routine, you know. Wow. So at night, you know, when my brain wasn't its most optimal, so when the planning happened, and in the morning when I was completely fresh, you know, hadn't even looked at my phone yet, and it was like, get that chapter up before you do your look at your phone, because we know once we look at our phone, the day's shot.
Yeah. So
originally I started with a plan to do 1,000 words a day. And then that changed because 1,000 words would take me between an hour and a half. Then it changed to just 1 hour uninterrupted writing. So whether you got 5 pages on the page or 5,000, it didn't matter as long as there was 1 hour of no interruptions. So, and I found that to be much more useful because you just need to get yourself into a zone, and getting yourself into a zone is just creating that environment. And having the sticky note there with all the points, that was the antidote to writer's block. So I wouldn't just be sitting there like, what am I writing about today? And then having the outline was my plan. So it was a combination. The structure served as kind of the string to my kite. You know, and then once the structure was there, I was able to be as free as I wanted within the confines of that structure, which is important because if you're too free, you know, it's like learning how to swim. Yeah. You know, swimming in a bathtub, you're not going to, it's too confining. Swimming in the ocean is too overwhelming. You want to swim in a pool, you know, you want to be able to see the walls and reach the walls if it gets dangerous. So for me, that process of planning and structuring the book before I even started writing a page was super, super, super important. And it's interesting because I'm doing this name now. I'm working in TV and film, and you know, first thing I did was write a script. And now when we're in the pitching phase, you have to write. It's called a Bible. And the Bible's just the structure. It's creating the structure of who are your characters, what are your themes, where is this going to go, give examples of your episodes. All of that should have probably have been done before I wrote the script. You know, and it also forces you to answer questions that you haven't addressed yet. So I think for me, the structure really helps. So, you know, when I work on another book, you know, I'll work on the outline first. And that by default asks you all the difficult questions, which is like, what is the big idea I'm trying to say here?
Yeah.
Okay. And then what are the 3, 4, 5 main ways I can show that? Okay. So those are my sections of the book. So this book is about love. What is my idea? What is my big idea in this book? The big idea in the book is, you know, love is a verb. Love isn't something you find. You know, love isn't something you earn. You know, love is always there. And you are a source of love. So that's my big idea. And then, well, how am I going where am I going to explore that? I'm going to explore that with love for self, love for others, and love for everything else. So now I have 3 separate sections. So now in love for self, how am I going to explore love for self? Well, I'm talking about love as being your own best friend. Love as being your own nurturing parent. Love is accepting your imperfections. You know, so now I'm going through these lists and now I'm naming my chapters. What about love for others? Well, love for others is having a good fight. Love is honoring the person who's in front of you. You know, love is communicating how you're difficult to be around. You know, so I'm finding these points, and this is all research. Yeah. This is not writing anything. This is getting these headlines. So now I have all of these, and then when I get to, okay, well, love is sharing how you're difficult to be around. Okay, let's write a chapter about that, and that's when the bullet points come. So there's a lot more. The structure helped, but this time I wrote with the structure, but my way. And I think when I did the second book, it was their structure and their way. They wanted each chapter to be a certain length. They wanted to have certain components. And I said, you know, let me make this feel more authentically mine. And I agree. Yeah, there should be personal stories, but they don't have to be 3-page stories. Sometimes the stories could be a paragraph or 2. You know, and they're just there to tap in on a personal level. And then I got to make points. And sometimes I don't have to, you know, overly go and make this sound like a textbook. You know, I can make a point here or there. And if anybody wants to see if the research is sound, they can Google it themselves. Right. And it's really about just getting people to the ideas and being like, oh, I never looked at it that way. I never thought about love being a verb. I never thought about the fact that, yeah, I don't have to qualify or be enough or be worthy for love. Okay, yeah, he's planted these seeds in my head. Now I can go deeper with that myself. Because if I had to make them go deeper, that would add twice the length of the book.
Yeah, that's what I really appreciated about it. Is like it was just like an honest communication that I felt like you were speaking at a level that was just so easy to understand and relate to. You know, it was just like some of the stories. It's like, yeah, fuck. Like I could really resonate with it, just as far as like how, just the concept of love. It's what I've been going through recently, and it's been a real challenge. Is like, and you probably understand what I mean too. It's like we don't feel worthy until the next thing, or the next thing, the next achievement, or the next, you know, get the approval, or the next thing, and then it's like we already are that. Like we've already that. Yeah. And it's like this like endless thing. And sometimes, I mean, you just have to bring it back and remember like, man, I'm already there. Like I've already have that. And just having that love for yourself is just such a great starting point at allowing people to think about that. Cause I think some people are confused, like, oh, well, what is self-love? Like, what does it actually mean? Right. And if you were to break it down, like what is it actually?
It's accepting yourself as you are. You know, it's embracing all that is imperfect. It's going easy on yourself. The same way you know, what I realized is, and this has only come through doing these interviews, is that the complications around people's understanding of love have nothing to do with their lives, and it has much to do with their interpretation of romantic relationships. So now you may have siblings, you may have parents, you may have friends. You have somebody in your life that you authentically love. That person, you can list off all their flaws. None of those flaws disqualify them from your love. You know, you've seen them at their worst, never disqualified them from your love. Because love, it doesn't require qualification. You know, they show you where love is. You feel love seeing things for them. You hold a baby in your hand for the first time. You know, it fills you up with love. There's no interaction. There's no transaction. That baby might poop on you, spit up on you. None of that disqualifies it from your love. You have no history. You've not been vulnerable with it. It's not been vulnerable with you. What is it? Love is already there. Love is the default. And what we do is we create all this mess. So then when we think about love for self, we don't look at it that way. Like, I should love myself the way I love my sister. And yeah, she's not perfect, and I know everything about her, but I love her regardless. That's me. I'm not perfect, and I know all my imperfections, but I should love myself regardless. But instead, we look at it through that romantic dating lens, which is, I'm looking for somebody completely perfect, put their best foot forward. I'm going to put my best foot forward, and if I'm not anything short of flawless, then I'm not going to qualify for their attention, their affection, a second date, their focus, you know, being important in their life. But that's not love. No, that's a whole bunch of other things. And you know, I want your listeners to think about that, because at the end of the day, all that hoopla, all the expensive dinners, all the trips to Paris, all the flowers, the Valentine's Day shit, all of that stuff, at the end of the day, you're really only successful when you're both wearing sweats, watching TV on the couch together. That's how you know you won. That's what you're really looking for. That's what you're actually looking for. You're not looking for a date on the red carpet. You know, you're not looking for someone to take a bunch of, you know, photos with and do hashtag couples goals. You're looking for someone that you can just be yourself around. You're looking for someone who's going to, you know, take care of you when you're old and clean up your diapers when you can't take care of yourself anymore. Like, that's, you know, it's that deep rooted love that happens even in these relationships where people, you know, put their best foot forward and look their greatest and wear their proverbial and literal makeup. And I think that's what I'm realizing when people say, how do I love myself? Is love yourself the way you actually, like, think about who you actually love and do that for yourself. Advocate for yourself. Stand up for yourself. Show your teeth. Establish your boundaries. Stand up for yourself the way you'd stand up for somebody you love. You know, be intimate with yourself. Self-hating. You can hug yourself. You know, look in the mirror naked and express gratitude instead of criticism for what's in front of you. You know, journal. Be more vulnerable with yourself. Go deeper. Keep asking the word why as you write. Why? 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 Why am I afraid of this? Why is that a big deal? Why is that so terrifying? Why is that so hurtful? Become more vulnerable with yourself. Dance with yourself. Feel your body. Pray. Irrespective of your religious beliefs, pray. Prayer will reveal to you what you really want. You know, when you're at your bedside, hands together, praying to whoever you believe in, what are you asking for? It's not about who you're praying to. It's about what you're asking for when you pray. What are you saying thank you for? Because it's not performative at that point. Because, yeah, we're all grateful for the oxygen we breathe and the clean water we get to drink and all of that stuff. But what are we actually grateful for? That's a level of intimacy that we need to explore with ourselves and a level of vulnerability. The only way for you to get to that point with another person where you can sit on the couch and watch Netflix for the evening after a long day is through vulnerability. You know, it's not through being perfect, because to be perfect means there's no vulnerability. And if there's no vulnerability, there's no connection. So realize that love is already flowing. And all we have to do is just, you know, maintain, establish, and clear away these pathways for it to flow. You know, like, think about it as a river. Throw a bunch of stones in the river, it's going to change the flow of the river. You know, throw enough stones, you create a dam, and now the river can't flow anymore. Those stones are past traumas, our insecurities, our limiting beliefs, you know, our limiting traditions and expectations around love that were given to us by culture, religion, media. You know, we watch Disney movies and that informs us what love needs to be. We watch porn, that influences what love needs to be. Watch rom-coms.
Crazy.
Yeah. And just
we have this perception of like how things should be. It's not real.
And those perceptions are, you know, and realize that like those perceptions serve an agenda for a society that requires us to buy stuff.
Yeah.
Like this society needs us to constantly be producing and purchasing for it to stay afloat. And, anything that's good for you is going to unplug you from that world. Learning how to sit quietly and listen to your breath, is not good for the economy.
No.
Staying
full, eating good foods that don't make you hungry every 2 minutes isn't good either.
Isn't good for the economy. You know what I mean? Accepting yourself as you are and owning two outfits, you know what I mean? Yeah. And that's it. Like all of these things, repairing a pair of shoes instead of replacing them, just all of these things that, at one point was the norm. And, we got into this industrialized age, and now we have new demands. And it's not about judging those demands. This is about recognizing it. This is what it is, and in a conversation yesterday, speaking with somebody who's heavily in the activist world, it was just like evil capitalism. Like calling it evil doesn't change anything.
Yeah.
View it as the nature. Like nobody is arguing that it exists. We all know it exists. Generally the debate is it good for us or is it bad for us? And I would just question and say, you know what? Let's not even take that route. Let's not bite from the tree of good and evil and judge it. Let's be curious. And when we're curious, and let's try to understand it, because another force of nature that we've always been bound to has been gravity. And the deeper we created an understanding, instead of me judging gravity and being like, so unfair that I have to like climb stairs to get to my third floor apartment. I wish I could just jump, That's what judging is, right?
Yeah.
Instead of being like, okay, well, let me understand it. And the deeper I understand it, the second as a society, we learn to understand gravity, we built planes and now we fly and now we cross oceans. That didn't come from ignoring gravity. That came from taking a deep dive and understanding it and learning how to work with it. So it's the same thing with these other things that are often, counterintuitive to what we think we want to accomplish. Understand capitalism, understand the nature of superficiality, understand what social media is doing to us, and instead of judging it, look at it and figure out how you can make it so you can fly as well.
Yeah, well said. It's so interesting, when we take responsibility for ourselves rather than looking for somebody else or to blame other people, how much easier it just gets. That there's so much energy that goes out that gets projected to other people about what's wrong and what everybody's doing. And it's like, it's such a waste, because if we just work on ourselves and just, like you said, get curious and ask, why does that bother me? Why does that trigger me? And like, ask these questions.
Yeah.
I mean, things get so much clearer, but it's like, there's so much energy wasted on the outward.
It's interesting because even that concept, like you can't, like energy cannot be created or destroyed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the energy is being relocated to, in a fashion that doesn't really lead us anywhere. And I think it's just it's an interesting idea, because it's there is just definitely, as my therapist says to me, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? And I think, I think about that when it comes to my energy. Do I want to be effective with my energy? Or do I just want to feel like I'm right? Do I want to validate that ego? Do I want to massage that ego and make it feel nice? And I think that's been such a concept for me to really try to grasp as I enter, new chapters of my life.
That's a great concept.
Yeah.
Because nobody ever wins when you're right. Like they're not, like it's not like a win-win. It's like you're right and somebody has to lose, and it's somebody's unhappy, somebody's resentful. It's like, for what? Like, what are we trying to do?
Yeah, there was an idea I saw. There was a Reddit article yesterday in one of the groups that I procrastinated on, and it said, what is something that you wish you learned earlier? And then one of the points somebody said was, it's never useful to be the smartest person in the room. And it started this kind of conversation. So what do you mean? Like, it's never in your benefit to be the smartest person in the room. And generally that's us trying to make sure the room knows we're the smartest.
Oh yeah, that's so true.
And I think about a lot that with my father, because my father at the end of the day, like there's so there's no artist in my family. So oftentimes when I create art, people are like, oh, who in your family gave you the artistic bone? I was like, I don't know. And then I know, cognitive strength, that's much more genetic as well. Like, IQ is genetic. And my sisters are both academically strong. I was academically strong as well. And, I think about that when it comes to my parents. But I was like, okay, well, my mom's clever, very clever. She, as a mom, she's clever, and she doesn't work. So I don't know, she could have been a chemical engineer or not. And my dad had a master's degree, but he came to Canada and drove a cab. They didn't accept his education when he came here. And I was like, I kept thinking, like, is he smart? And then I realized he's brilliant because he doesn't speak. Like, he's just quiet. Like, he'll be in a room full of people talking and he doesn't speak, and he's got some and I've grown up with him. So I know he's got controversial opinions. He's got all this type of stuff, but also it's like, he doesn't speak, but I grew up in a house where like all he was watching was either the news or documentaries, and whenever it's funny. He uses my success as an author. Like, he uses it in a way like, oh, you have access to the bookstores. Like, they know you. So he thinks that I can walk into the bookstore and just like take books. So it's like, as if I can walk into Barnes and Noble and just be like, I'm Humble the Poet. I'm going to take all these 7 books with me. But because in Canada I have a deeper relationship with the bookstore, which is Indigo. And he's like, just get me all of these books. And they're always books on economy and books on economics. So that's what he studied in school. But it's just interesting. Like, he absorbs it all. But I've never seen him in a room talk about it. And I think that might be a sign of his brilliance.
Well, you talk about that in your book too, towards the end, about listening and just how important it is.
Yeah.
And how you were working through things sometimes where you're not really listening, but you like want to get your idea out there and, and I think we all do that, where we want to say something, we don't fully listen or like, take in the information. And it's so beautiful when you do sit with somebody that you can tell is listening. It's not like, oh yeah, well, next to the next thing. You're like, fuck off. You didn't even listen to what I said. Like, like, it's so important. And it hit me because having a podcast has allowed me to do exactly what you're saying. And that is like, just shut up and listen. And it's just so important. And, I really love that because it's such a lesson because everybody just wants to speak. And you miss so much when you don't allow that person to get their ideas, especially if they're not one that's like overly chatty. And it's like when they do speak, you really want to listen and like kind of like ponder on it a little bit. Right.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. The oldest friend I have, my friend Chris, and I've known him since we were 4. He's a really good listener. And again, there could be something there where he just doesn't ever want to share, but he's an amazing, and he's such a great listener where it's like, he'll ask you a question or two and then you'll answer. And then you'll be like, yeah, so what's up with you? And you're like, no, we didn't finish. He goes, there was a few more things I needed to ask you. Like, you didn't finish answering all of these. And then he starts to pick up on the parts that you didn't want to talk about, so he reads between the lines very, very well. Yeah, I remember I used to date a girl who, at the time, I didn't appreciate it as much because I actually found it annoying. She would pick a random topic. She would just be like, "Hey, Lance, tell me about SpaceX," and you're like, "What? Why are you asking me about?" She would do that to me daily. She would pick random topics and just demand I tell her about them. Looking back now, I appreciate it a little bit more because she just wanted to hear stuff. I think her questioning could have been a little bit more specific, but yeah, she would literally she would pick films I had never seen. She'd pick topics I'd never heard of, songs I never heard. She would just say, just tell me about these. And, since then, meeting so many other, people who just are only talking about themselves, they're making everything about themselves. I appreciated that she made it about a topic. And, and I've since had conversations with her and it's been, they have been a lot more interesting, but Yeah, there is this idea of listening. And I think it's really interesting that you brought up podcasts, because podcasts are conversations for an audience. And having, podcasts with someone like you, where we've had brief conversations on the phone, so there's a level of rapport, but I've had conversations with people who have no idea who I am and are doing it because somebody else made a connection, and you can sense the who the fuck are you in their questionings. Then you have people who have been waiting to get me on their show, and then there's a different level of enthusiasm. And then I have my friends, like when I went on Jay Shetty's podcast, and it's a different type of, it's a different, what I realized there very quickly was, I assumed having a friend on the other side of the conversation was going to make it kind of a softball experience. What I didn't think about was he viewed having a friend on the other side of the conversation as, oh, I don't have to tiptoe around anything today. Because he's been interviewing a lot of celebrities, and what you learn is celebrities, they pre-screen questions. They have 5 people in the room. You mistakenly ask the wrong question, say the wrong thing, they could even potentially walk out. Like that, stuff like that happens. And then you also have to run the risk of having a great conversation with them and then getting a call the next day saying, hey, remember at this point, cut that out. So what I didn't realize was he looked at it as like, oh, this is my friend, and we have conversations like this all the time. Okay, we're gonna make this we're gonna go really deep with this. This is gonna be the exact opposite of a softball thing, because I know what he's capable of. And I think they're all just really interesting styles of questions. So some of it's like listening in real time. Some of it, I think what Jay did was he's been listening to me for years and used that to create a conversation for an audience, and then me getting messages of, the way people speak about that conversation, because they're like, he sounds different in that conversation. I'm like, yeah, because we're friends. But then, as I said, there's also having those conversations with people where in real time, you're establishing that deeper core, and listening is the essential part of that. And there's different reasons why we can't listen. And I think for men specifically, one of the real reasons that we struggle with listening is because sometimes what we hear is triggering uncomfortable feelings. And we have not been necessarily encouraged or provided with the tools to address those, other than shut it down. Like, whoa. You're saying stuff that makes me feel all, how do I shut you up? You're telling me about a problem you have? Let's find a solution. And I have a friend that called yesterday. A friend that called me yesterday. He's an artist, and he goes, "Can I just vent to you about artist stuff?" And the story was about somebody hiring him for something. He makes music. They hired him to make them some music for a fashion show, and they can't articulate what they want. He goes ahead based off what they want, like what he thinks they want, and presents them with something. And by the time it's all said and done, they wanted next to nothing creative. They just literally wanted him to mix like 3 songs together, like easy stuff. And that frustrated him. But he's like, listen, I don't, and I was about to give tips, like, maybe in the contract, put, we can only do 3 revisions, maybe put in the contract, get the money up front so you don't have to deal with this stuff. He's like, no. I don't need tips. I just want to get it out. I just want to speak to another artist and get it out of my system as to what's bothering me. And learning that, like, do you want comfort or do you want solutions when somebody comes to vent to you? I'm learning that too. Like, do you want to just be comforted right now, or do you want some pragmatic solutions? Because I don't think I reach out to people for comfort. I think I want solutions every single time I vent anything. And I want very pragmatic solutions. And I'm realizing not everybody wants that. Some people just want to be seen. Some people just want to be heard. And how you make somebody feel determines the quality of your relationship with them.
So true, man. So much there. I want to kind of just circle back because I want to, about the talking on Jay Shetty and doing it in person like that. Just in general, like that's the magic as well of like being in person, of like that, just the energetically itself, and like being able to have a conversation when someone's in front of you is just so powerful. Yeah. And as much as I love doing virtual because it allows us, it's like there's only so much time to like really, you know what I mean? And I find it's a challenge, but it's also so beautiful to be able to like, you know, dive into somebody's story and then like have them share it in like a short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's something so special about being in a room with somebody and just having that sort of in-person energy.
And there's a trade-off both ways, I realize, because
totally.
I've been in conversations with people around starting a podcast, and I was like, yeah, I want to do some in-person interviews. They're like, then you'll never get anybody, you know?
True.
And it's a lot easier for anybody, you know, all the way up to Obama to say, okay, I just got to stand in front of my computer for 30 minutes. That's a lot easier than being show up in this city and then be at this location in this city, camera ready, all of these different things. So, you know, there's a pragmatic trade-off that goes both ways that I'm learning and understanding. But yeah, I do think about the in-person a lot because there's so many more things happening.
Yeah.
You know, and it's the, you know, am I wearing pants? You know what I mean? Like it's just anything from that capacity. But I think I'm realizing there's a trade-off for the convenience and there's a trade-off for both. But I think I think there is a beauty, you know, and I don't know how far back you can remember in the world of like chat groups and your first online friend and how like,
oh man,
potentially strange it was when you guys actually saw each other in person.
Yeah.
And I think what I realized was over the pandemic, I was living in Toronto and then I was moving to LA right after the pandemic. I had established maybe half a dozen friendships off of community. Yeah, the chat app.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And not realizing when I saw those people for the first time that it was the first time. It didn't feel like a first time encounter.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, I was like, oh, how you doing? You know, and it's like, great to finally meet you. Like, oh man, we've been chatting.
Yeah, that's so weird.
Almost daily. Yeah. Yeah. And vice versa, even with your friends. Like it's, you know, sometimes, you know, as I said, like this friend, Chris, like he lives in Germany now. Like I saw him during the pandemic in Toronto. And then, yeah, now it's just calls, audio calls, FaceTimes or whatever. And it's like, I don't know. I think there is a beauty to that. Like there is opportunities for connection, but yeah, you do want these deeper connections on a deeper level. And I think there's a lot of that. And I think about that even now too, like getting a PlayStation and being like, you know, putting on headphones and chatting with my friends while we play FIFA. Like that's still better than nothing.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, and there is a beauty to being able to have friends all over the planet. So any time zone, someone's up, someone's awake. Yeah. And, you know, I do, most of my work is still happening on Zoom, including the work I do in LA. You know, people who are 20 minutes away are still having Zoom calls with me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wild when you meet somebody and you're like, wow, you're a lot bigger than I thought, or a lot taller.
Yeah. Yeah. There's that.
You're like, shit, I thought you were short.
Yeah. Yeah. Generally, as long as people are surprised that you were taller than they thought, it's always better. Yeah.
You talk about that trip with Wim Hof, and Aubrey talks about it too quite a bit. And I wasn't even going to get into this, but since it's kind of popped up, I kind of want to ask you about Wim Hof. Like, what's your relationship with him? Actually being able to go into the cold with him and have those brothers around you. Like how did that change you? Like what, just because that guy's message is just so powerful in the world with his cold plunge and doing, you know, challenging shit.
Yeah. Something that Aubrey, so I got invited to that trip by Lewis Howes, who at that point was somebody I saw once every 6 months. And I'd been on his show, but we had a friendship before the show. And we would meet up at like a restaurant, and generally our relationship was grounded on our women problems. That's kind of what it was. You know, I look at it, I feel like those are the seasons of our friendships. So who he was dating when I first met him, what different relationships he's been in, and, you know, seeing his enthusiasm to break up, you know, watching all that stuff and vice versa. And yeah, you know, and I wasn't living in LA at the time. I was just visiting a lot. And then to get a message from him saying, hey, do you want to come to Poland to do Wim Hof with a bunch of influencers? And that sentence not even feeling like a complete sentence at the time. Like, what's Wim Hof? Like WIMHOF? What the hell is that? Thinking autocorrect got in the way. And with a bunch of influencers. That was the word. It wasn't a bunch of men, and it wasn't a bunch of brothers. It was a bunch of influencers. So I Google Wim Hof, and I see that it's a dude that sits in the ice, and I was like, okay, that's a hell no. That's a complete no. And when I'm thinking influencers, I'm literally thinking like, your TikTokers, your attractive girls, your selfie takers, all of that. And I was like, none of this sounds like an exciting journey. None of this sounds cool or anything like that. And he's like, look, I'll send you an email with all the details tomorrow. So I was asking a bunch of questions, obviously. And it was, I think, a week turnaround. So it's like, you're booking a last minute flight to Poland. It's going to be expensive. So there wasn't a lot of notice. And then when he sent the email, that's when he listed out everybody. And then I realized it was all men, and it was all influential men. So it wasn't influencers. It was retired football players. It was, and Aubrey Marcus was the only name on that list who I had even previously met other than Lewis. I didn't know anybody else on that list. And at that time, Aubrey had just been on the podcast. And the time I had gone on this podcast, we were supposed to do dinner that night, and something came up and we couldn't. So me and him didn't have a relationship other than me being on the show. So I said yes. And then what I realized very quickly, and Aubrey had said this outside of this experience, but he goes, you should always judge your spiritual teachers by how loud they laugh.
Yes.
And that's something that hit me because I grew up with my parents having a lot of spiritual teachers, and they were always just like super serious, like my shit don't stink, take me completely serious. And then you meet Wim Hof, who I can only describe as an off-season mall Santa. Like,
yeah.
what do those guys do when it's not so Christmas? Good. You know what I mean? Like, that's who Wim Hof is. He's just this guy who is absolutely bonkers. He's more bonkers than you think. And, he came in, he's like, hey guys, what's up? And we're like, hey, how you doing? He's like, okay, what time do you guys want to wake up? And we're like, we just flew here from LA. Time difference is going to suck. Can we say 10? Okay, I'll be here 10:45, and then they're just casual. Yeah. And then he goes, do you guys want to drink? I'll teach you how to get rid of a hangover too. We're like, what? Like, this is like not what I was thinking the spiritual journey was going to be. And what you realize is he is somebody that, and he has his son is kind of like the responsible adult of this Wim Hof movement. So there's Wim Hof, the individual who developed a breathing technique and developed a relationship with the ice and developed a relationship with his body that is just, superhuman, and accessible to everybody, and requires nothing, requires no secrets, requires no money, requires nothing. And then there's his son who's helping him turn it into a movement that both allows him to pay his bills, but also makes it accessible as possible to people. And then, so what happened over those 4 days is me and these 13 other gentlemen, we deeply bonded. We bonded over our fears of getting into the ice, jumping off waterfalls, walking through the hills in our shorts and only our shorts. And that continually opened up more vulnerability. And it was beautiful because there was still male masculine energy. There's still a lot of competition happening. There was still a lot of everybody's doing it, so I got to do it type energy. Yeah. But there was also, sitting around circles and just crying and just hugging and just doing all of that. And then Wim, I think those experiences, and Wim doesn't do private stuff. He really, unless you're Beyonce, you're not getting private sessions from Wim Hof. And then he started joining in on these vulnerability things. And I think it reconnected him with his son on a deeper level. I think I didn't know, but there was time that they weren't together. And at one point, we're in the middle of this mountain in Poland. And what you had to do if you wanted any reception to call your family or have anything, you had to climb to the top of this hill. You know, it's like a 5-minute hike. You have to climb to the hill
Unreal.
to get your phone to work. And I remember being up there and late at night. And again, you're in the middle of nowhere. And I remember he drove by because where he was sleeping was a little bit, it was like a 10-minute drive from where we were sleeping. And he got out and he gave me a hug and he said, "Thank you." He goes, "You guys helped me a lot." And I was like, "We helped you." And then realized that that experience, and I learned later on from the guys, because I wasn't in the room when whatever happened, but him and his son had kind of deepened their relationship. And there was just a beauty to that. So I think that experience was really there. And I think what he taught me was like, look, you know, he just continues to say, trust your body, trust your body. And his son has established the Wim Hof kind of the institute and really legitimizing medical professionals involved and everything. And, you know, going to those later on, like going to one in Utah and meeting the doctors there, like you're like, oh, wow, like your education and your methods are way clearer than Wim's, you know, like Wim says go on the ice, and you're like, well, what if I get hypothermia or if I like get frostbite? So just be like, trust yourself, you know. And then, meanwhile, you speak to one of the doctors that work for him, and then they'll break it down like, oh no, like this is what we'll look for. These are the signs. You don't need to be in the ice for more than 2 minutes. And I'll be like, what? We did 10 minutes with Wim. And she's like, yeah, Wim's crazy. Don't do that, you know. And it was more of a fun bonding session. But I think what I realized was he's an individual on his journey and did such a great job doing it. And it was the first time I met somebody who had useful answers to impacting your life in a positive way. You know, what going in the ice does is it recalibrates your fight or flight, and it builds a level of resilience that you didn't know existed. And it doesn't require anything other than just sitting in the ice. You don't have to know how to do anything. You're just sitting there. Your mind is screaming, we're going to die. And you're just like, okay, well, we're going to stay here and just see what happens. And then your mind slowly calms down. Your body slowly figures itself out. You get used to the cold, and then you get out. And then all of a sudden, like your bar of stress is significantly higher, and things that would normally cause a panic attack don't. Yeah. And you're just like, yeah, you're like, wow, this is so simple. And then also it makes you breathe. And then, you know, he's like, the reason we have problems is we breathe too shallow. And he's just like, breathe, motherfucker, breathe. And like, this is all he's teaching us. He's teaching us to breathe, and he's teaching us to be cold. And it's just revealing that living in a life of comfort and convenience is killing our resilience and making us more fragile and making it hard for us to deal with any challenges. And it's going to eventually stunt our evolution as a species. And it was that, but at the same time, it was also like, hey, let's go into the city. And we went out to a bar, you know, and I'm watching this guy drink 3 hot chocolates and like, you know, like it's nothing. And just like, you know, he's fun.
He knows how to be human too. He's got that spiritual aspect, but he's a human being. He knows how to be a normal human.
I would never call him a normal human. I think what I would say is, because I saw he has a young son, and his son was probably 3 years old at the time. I honestly don't think his son realized that was his father. I think he viewed him as his best friend. I feel like Wim Hof is a 3-year-old in a 60, 70-year-old's body. And, you know, and his older son was explaining that. He goes, listen, man, like this guy is cool, but like this guy was doing, he was picking me up from school, he would be doing handstands in the parking lot waiting for me to arrive. And he's like, that was so embarrassing. Every other parent's looking at him, doing handstands, walking across the parking lot. He's just a free child. And there's just a beauty to that when it came to his life. And I think, you know, and then that bonded me with those guys forever. We have a chat group, you know, and there's just messages in there, and they're generally, you know, somebody doing something cold, or somebody having a child, or, you know, something like that. And I built really great relationships, and some of those guys have gone into business together, and some of them are expanding into bringing more cold plunges or cold baths to the States. And it's beautiful. And and I think the big lesson I learned from that too is, like, you want to bond with people, don't go to Hawaii and have fun. Suffer with each other, get vulnerable with each other, get scared with each other. You guys will bond significantly quicker than you'll ever bond at a guy's trip where we just get wasted and party.
Totally. Yeah, it reminds me to like those old days of playing sports and going to battle together, or even sitting with people in ayahuasca.
Mm,
I got to sit with Aubrey and Vi in doing a ceremony in Costa Rica a couple years ago, and we did this thing where it was called, we had to like puke up. We had to drink this tea, and like to the point where we were so bloated that we had to puke, and everybody's puking together. And
mm,
there's something magical about puking with people,
mm.
like being in this like weird energy, man. But there's like a bonding that goes on there.
Yeah.
It's like sitting in that darkness, and just feeling like we did it.
And being seen. Like,
Yeah.
this person saw me be
Totally.
ugly. This person saw me be vulnerable,
Yeah.
and they still want to be around me. It's not us
Yeah.
partying and be like, hey, we should get together. And then, you just party with somebody for a weekend and you guys never connect again.
Yeah.
But it's having these deeper moments, I think, that's the recipe for a meaningful relationship.
Love it, man. What would you like to leave everybody with that may be struggling right now? Maybe going through some adversity, maybe lacking that feeling of wholeness in their life, of love. What is one piece of advice you'd like to leave them with today?
Just realize that all the things that we're all struggling with, they are partially a result of the society we live in and the wiring that we have. We're not designed to be happy. We're designed to eat, sleep, and reproduce. And so go easy on yourself. There's there's nobody doing it better than you. There really isn't. And, if you feel FOMO and you feel like, you're not living up to stuff, it's because you're probably on social media and it's designed to do that, and if you feel like you're not being productive enough, it's because we live in a society that wants you to be endlessly productive and they want you to be a robot and not a living creature. And if feeling left out scares you, it's because we're humans, and keeping our village happy was a survival method, and that software still exists in us. And that was software that we had for 40,000 years before, we came to modern society, and that no longer was relevant. That's not going to go away. Just be easy on yourself. Like these are all the reasons we have these issues, and they're not going to go away. We still have ancient parts of our body that, we don't even, whether it's our appendix or something like that doesn't serve a purpose anymore. Like, they're here. And then, and be easy on yourself, because there's nothing that comes from being hard on yourself. As us self-employed individuals know, we have the worst boss ever. But being mean to ourselves doesn't make us work harder, and prioritize your self-respect over your self-esteem. We are now in a world where there's metrics between how many people know that you exist, how many people like your photos, how many people are commenting. This stuff is still based on an algorithm. What you're really doing, what you're really being rewarded for is how much you're keeping people on a platform. It's not your self-worth or your self-value. You as a human being don't have worth or value. You can't measure a human being in enoughness or worthiness. Enoughness, save enoughness for your gas tank. Do I have enough gas to get there? Yes. Am I enough of a person? That doesn't make sense. There isn't a wholeness that's required. You are a whole person as you are, even with those feelings of incompleteness. There is no enoughness. I'm not going to tell you you're enough or you're worthy, because that's not how you measure somebody. And it's just really important to understand that these things, that's why it feels so discombobulating, because these things just don't make sense. And if we let them go, and if you really want to take a deeper journey on this, realize the stuff that you hate still relates to the stuff that you love. Hearing, if somebody has your ex's name and you hear their name and it triggers you and you like that person a little bit less, it's no different than somebody having your mentor's name and you liking them a little bit more. Our biases go both ways. You have to abandon your preferences of love or like if you want to abandon your preferences of hate and trauma, and detachment isn't letting things go, it's just creating distance, because we can't let things go, and let's abandon ideas of overcoming fears and overcoming shortcomings, and just and create relationships of distance, create relationships of progress over perfection, and baby steps add up in the right way.
Boom. Thank you, brother. That was so fire. So, How to Be Loved, available everywhere. everywhere you get books, right? It's online,
Yes.
Amazon, everywhere. And
Everywhere.
follow you on Instagram as well. Humble the
At
Poet.
Humble the Poet. Yep. And if you can't find the book, you can check humblethepoet.com/love.
Dude, thank you so much, man. This was awesome.
Thank you so much for having me, man.
All right. Thanks, everybody.